When Disney World opened Mickey's Birthdayland in 1988, it was only supposed to be a temporary addition to Magic Kingdom to celebrate Mickey Mouse's 60th birthday. But when it turned out to be far more popular than Disney had anticipated, the land was soon turned into a permanent attraction, eventually being remodeled into Mickey's Toontown Fair, a country retreat for Disney's cartoon characters, complete with walk-through houses, a meet and greet, and a roller coaster. But although Toontown Fair was well received by many families and became a memorable part of many visits to Disney World in the 90s and 2000s, as time went on, its temporary origins and the closure of the attractions surrounding it did create difficulties for the land. And when Disney launched a major retheme of Fantasyland in the 2010s, Toontown Fair faded into obscurity. So let's take a look back at the rise and fall of Mickey's Toontown Fair. At the Magic Kingdom of the 70s and 80s, most characters didn't meet guests at the typical meet and greet areas we're used to today, but instead roamed freely around the different lands of the park, waiting for guests to approach them. This did provide a greater degree of spontaneity to seeing characters, but it also created an interesting problem. Because there was no guarantee that any one character would be in a specific part of the park, many guests would often end trips disappointed when they were unable to easily find Mickey. So with this in mind, Disney executives started looking for ways to provide some sort of permanent location at Magic Kingdom where guests could guarantee to see Mickey Mouse. And the late 80s provided the perfect opportunity for this. In 1988, Walt Disney World was about to embark on one of the most major expansions in its history, as construction was underway simultaneously for its third theme park, Disney MGM Studios, and its first standalone water park, Typhoon Lagoon. However, before the resort could celebrate its biggest year ever in 1989, there was still another celebration to attend to. 1988 was Mickey Mouse's 60th birthday, the 60th anniversary of his debut in Steamboat Willie, and Disney executives felt that the park should host a celebration to mark the occasion. This decision, though, was made at very short notice, with executives not wanting to just throw up a few banners, but to build an entirely new area in Magic Kingdom dedicated to Mickey. And so, with little time to create a brand new land, Disney Imagineers hurriedly selected an area in the far northeastern corner of the park. The existing Grand Prix Raceway into Tomorrowland was rerouted slightly, and an area was cleared out next to the Fantasyland attraction 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, only 3 acres in size due to the limited time. And on June 18th, 1988, the newly named Mickey's Birthdayland would open to the public. But before we get to that, I want to talk about this video's sponsor, Aura. You may have heard how in August, it was reported that 2.9 billion records were stolen from American data brokers National Public Data, who provide personal information to employers during background checks. Information that includes a person's full name, address, date of birth, phone number, and social security number. And it was also reported by the Los Angeles Times that the hacking group responsible for this data breach may have released the records online for free. Data breaches like this are becoming increasingly common online. With the sheer frequency and scale of these breaches, it's incredibly likely that all of us have shown up in at least one. And you never know how that information might be used against you. And what's more, if your personal information has been stolen in a breach, you might not even realize it. Thankfully, Aura has a solution to this. Aura monitors your personal data across billions of data points, from public court records to dark web forums, to detect if your details show up and alert you to potential identity theft. Aura also provide other features like a password manager and spam call protection, all inside one app. They also provide up to $5 million in identity theft insurance should the worst case scenario happen. You can click the link in the description or go to aura.com/GeorgeBrowning to get a 14-day free trial of Aura and see if any of your personal information has been exposed. Thanks very much to Aura for sponsoring this video. Now let's get back to it.
It was official! My Birthdayland was open to everybody!
Only intended to be temporary for the celebration, the area was themed to the fictional town of Duckburg, the setting of the then new Saturday morning cartoon show DuckTales. The story of the land was that Minnie Mouse had planned a surprise party for Mickey in his neighborhood, and she'd invited all the park guests as well as several Disney characters to attend the celebration. Guests could enter Birthdayland either on foot through Fantasyland or by taking the Walt Disney World Railroad, which opened a new station in the area. This was the preferred way to travel to the land, and the train was redecorated as the Mickey's Birthdayland Express, now playing a special song for the celebration, with new decorations lining the route, depicting various Disney characters making their way there. Upon arriving in the town, they would find a small collection of streets, containing cartoony, miniature facades, representing the stores and houses where different Disney characters lived and worked. And in the town square, they'd find a statue of Duckburg's founder, Cornelius Coote, a minor character from DuckTales. Most of the attractions in the land were housed in large circus tents, referred to as birthday tents, likely chosen as a way to quickly construct temporary buildings with cheaper theming. In Mickey's Hollywood Theatre, guests would finally have a dedicated meet and greet spot to see Mickey Mouse and wish him a happy birthday. From here, they could go next door to the largest circus tent to watch Mickey's Birthdayland live, a musical stage show where Minnie assembles all of Mickey's friends to help her bake a special birthday cake, which they inevitably mess up and have to fix before he arrives. Once the show was over, they could then exit into a post-show party room, where the characters would appear once again and sing and dance on top of a large cake. But really, the most significant attraction of the land was Mickey's house. A full-sized cartoon house complete with a car on the driveway, a walkthrough attraction inviting guests to explore the various rooms, each decorated with gags and references to Mickey's various cartoon adventures. The attraction ended in another tent housing a screening room where guests could watch Mickey Mouse cartoons. Mickey's Birthdayland was also home to a hedge maze named the Mouseka Maze, which contained a number of hidden water jets that would shoot at guests, and a petting zoo named Grandma Duck's Farm. And lastly, at opening, the area was also home to a gigantic 60-foot tall inflatable Mickey, towering over Duckburg. Being a temporary land, it did clearly look like it was made for cheap, with its miniature facades and very small number of attractions. However, Mickey's Birthdayland actually proved to be very popular. And so after its initial year, the area remained open throughout 1989. And when the extended birthday celebration finally came to an end in April 1990, after nearly 2 years, Disney decided that it needed to make a quick return. The land underwent a brief refurbishment, opening on May 26th of that year under the new name Mickey's Starland, a slight modification to move away from the birthday celebrations and introduce even more characters, now from the Disney Afternoon TV programming block. Characters from shows like DuckTales, Chippendale's Rescue Rangers, and the Gummy Bears were all brought into Starland, featuring alongside Mickey in a new stage show replacing Birthdayland Live named Mickey's Magical TV World. And Mickey's Starland also brought with it a popular new addition to Grandma Duck's Farm, in the form of a retired dairy cow named Minnie Moo, who was bought by Disney from a farm in Minnesota for her 3 black spots, resembling a Mickey silhouette. Over the next few years, Mickey's Starland would continue life as a modest yet successful addition to Magic Kingdom, mainly popular among families with young kids. Mickey's Magical TV World would be gradually updated to include whichever cartoon characters were popular at the time, with characters from shows like Darkwing Duck and Tailspin being added a few years in. And sometime around 1993, the show was updated to adapt to new trends, now featuring a segment where the characters start rapping.
Your science project went awry, but don't you worry, don't you cry. This show won't stop and we won't fail. Come on.
And that same year, Disney would seek to continue the success of their character-focused land as they brought the concept to the West Coast, opening a new, much larger expansion to Disneyland named Mickey's Toontown. This would use many of the same design choices from Starland, but would ditch the circus tents for a more fleshed out town square area, and prominently featured Roger Rabbit, a character Disney was keen to capitalize on following the success of his movie, who would receive his own dark ride. Back in Florida, the Mouse Maze was replaced with Donald's Boat, a splash pad play area for young kids. Mickey's Starland lasted for a couple more years, briefly being renamed Mickey's Toyland for the 1995 holiday season, before being closed around March 1996 for its second and final redo, the most significant in its history. With the success of the Disney afternoon beginning to slow down, the TV elements would be dropped, and the land would revert back to the classic gang of Disney characters, reopening on June 29, 1996, under the name Mickey's Toontown Fair.
Mickey and his friends have brought the county fair to town for the big 25th celebration. Mickey's Toontown Fair is the brand new home to your favorite characters, and you can say how do you do and shake hands with them all.
The new story for the area would see it more closely tie in with Disneyland's Toontown, now representing a small rural town where the residents of its counterpart would vacation to in the summer, in the midst of its annual county fair, a story used to explain the tents that had remained from the Birthdayland era. The interior decorations were slightly updated to fit the county fair story, with Mickey now playing the role of a judge in the fair, and his uniform was hung up in his bedroom. The Mickey meet and greet was moved to the new judge's tent, the area formerly containing the screening room, filled with similar decorations, like various plants and vegetables the townsfolk had grown for the fair's competitions. Now that the meet and greet had been moved, the Hollywood Theatre was torn down and replaced by Minnie's Country House, a similar walkthrough attraction. In Minnie's kitchen, guests could get a look inside of her fridge, which of course contained entirely cheese. The circus tent that originally housed the live stage show was changed into a large gift shop, and its post-show tent became the new Toontown Hall of Fame, another meet and greet area housing several of Mickey's friends, like Goofy, Donald, and Pluto, but also a rotation of additional Disney characters depending on what was popular at the time. In its early years, this was a group of Disney villains. The largest addition of the 1996 renovation replaced Grandma Duck's farm. Minnie Moo was moved to her new home at Fort Wilderness, where she lived out the remainder of her life until she passed away in 2001. And the space was transformed into Toontown Fair's first actual ride, named the Barnstormer at Goofy's Wiseacre Farm, or more simply just the Barnstormer. This was a junior roller coaster where guests would ride on board Goofy's homemade plane, partially inspired by the old Disney cartoon Goofy's Glider. The ride's queue was full of detail, and guests could see the different plants Goofy was growing, eventually journeying into his workshop, the former barn from the petting zoo, where inside they get a look at Goofy's plans and prototypes. The ride would soar into the air before coming crashing back down towards the farm and through a Goofy-shaped hole in the wall of the barn. A ride that was used heavily in Disney World marketing materials well into the 2000s, and a first ever coaster experience for many young kids, including me. Well, actually, I think about 3 or 4 months earlier, I may have been on a smaller coaster in my local area, but the Barnstormer was definitely my first Disney roller coaster, and one of the first that I remember really well. Lastly, the nearby restrooms were themed to Pete's Garage. The same year Toontown Fair opened, Tokyo Disneyland would also receive a Toontown of its own, very similar to Disneyland's, carrying a lot of the same attractions. The Judge's Tent and the Hall of Fame were among Magic Kingdom's must-do attractions for many families. The Disney villain side of the Hall of Fame was eventually swapped out for characters from Pocahontas, and sometime in the late 90s, Winnie the Pooh, Tigger, and Piglet were added to the area under the moniker Storybook Friends. But by 2004, Disney World changed the additional characters once again, this time to satisfy the overwhelming demand for meet and greets with Disney princesses, with characters like Cinderella, Aurora, and Belle taking up a permanent home in the large circus tent. Mickey's Toontown Fair was the version of the area that most people remember, a successful expansion of the Birthdayland concept, and in particular, one that satisfied the need for Magic Kingdom to have a dedicated character meet and greet area. Other than the swapping out of characters, it remained pretty unchanged throughout its lifespan. But while Mickey's Toontown Fair was serving its purpose very effectively, it did still carry with it a few problems. Because of the original temporary nature of Mickey's Birthdayland, Toontown Fair just looked much cheaper than both its California and Tokyo counterparts. Most of the tents from the original design had remained, and while a decent story was written to make them fit the new theme, they still held this very basic look. And of course, it just didn't have as many attractions as the regular Toontowns did. California not only had the same walkthrough attractions as Florida and its own junior coaster, but also 2 additional walkthrough playhouse attractions for young kids and a dark ride, and was all in all just much better detailed and themed. Toontown Fair was essentially the Toontown Light, but another problem for Toontown Fair actually had a lot more to do with its neighbour. Mickey's Birthdayland had opened next to Fantasyland's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, one of Magic Kingdom's most popular but also most expensive rides. And when it closed in 1994, largely as a result of its high-cost, low-capacity operation, it was eventually replaced 2 years later with an aerial meet-and-greet area named Ariel's Grotto. Parts of the 20,000 League Lagoon were redecorated to fit the theme of the grotto, like putting a King Triton statue in the water, but a large part of it was just left abandoned, as the attraction sat decaying in plain view of guests. The closure of 20,000 Leagues reduced the number of major offerings in Magic Kingdom's Fantasyland significantly. Ariel's Grotto wasn't bad, but it was no replacement for the ride. And the area was dealt another blow in 2004 when the lagoon was filled in, reducing the visual appearance of the area and leaving a large empty space right next to Toontown. A Winnie the Pooh play area was built in the space in late 2005, but again, this was only another small attraction, and much of the land was still left unused. With the initial loss of 20,000 Leagues, and the following decade of only small replacements, this left an entire corner of the park without any major offerings, something that only became more obvious as Toontown Fair aged and became less interesting. And around 2009, something else would happen that would put the land into even more jeopardy. In the late 2000s, Disney's main competition, Universal, began construction of their largest expansion to date, the Wizarding World of Harry Potter at Islands of Adventure. A massive, intricately detailed land modelled after the Harry Potter movies, with a Hogsmeade village and a gigantic Hogwarts castle towering over it, housing a new e-ticket ride. Set to open in 2010, the land was one of the first in the new era of theme park projects, all based around creating deeply immersive fantasy worlds, and a project that, of course, Disney had to respond to. And so in 2009, Disney would announce a much-needed expansion to Magic Kingdom's Fantasyland, adding new, bigger rides, finally making use of the space left behind by 20,000 Leagues, and replacing Mickey's Toontown Fair. The expansion, dubbed New Fantasyland, would attempt to consolidate the story of the area. A wall would be built marking the boundaries of the grounds of Cinderella Castle. Everything inside this area, like the carousel, would be inside the castle courtyard, and everything beyond it would be in the Enchanted Forest, which contained the homes of several other Disney princesses. There was a Beauty and the Beast area, with Belle and the Beast's castle, holding a meet and greet and a new restaurant named Be Our Guest, and next to it the village from the movie with Gaston's Tavern. There was also a new Little Mermaid area where Ariel's Grotto had been, now home to the Voyage of the Little Mermaid dark ride. And third, another castle home to several more princess meet and greets. And in the area where Mickey's Toontown Fair had been, Pixie Hollow, home to Tinkerbell and her friends, and a relocated version of the Dumbo Flying Elephants ride, as according to them, it was Magic Kingdom's most popular. To do this, they decided to double the original attraction's capacity by simply having 2 of them. The announcement was welcomed, although it was also met with concern from fans that it may have been a little too focused on princesses, which did seem to dominate much of the area. And so in 2011, the plans were modified to allow the area to appeal to a broader demographic, with the central castle being changed into the Seven Dwarfs Mine Train, and the Pixie Hollow area being completely cancelled. In February of that year, Mickey's Toontown Fair would permanently close, ending a 23-year tenure in the park under its various names. In the interim, Magic Kingdom's Mickey Mouse meet and greet moved to the Town Square Theatre at the entrance to the park, and over the course of 2012, the new area would gradually reopen as Storybook Circus. Storybook Circus would take its theme from Dumbo, becoming the location of a travelling circus which had arrived in Fantasyland, and everything that had formerly been in Toontown Fair was either removed, or in many cases, refurbished to fit the circus theme. The new doubled up version of the Dumbo ride was built in the space formerly occupied by parts of the queue of Goofy's Barnstormer. The Barnstormer did survive, but as a result of the changes, it was renamed the Barnstormer featuring the Great Goofini, dropping the farm theme to recast Goofy as a circus performer / stunt pilot. The change in theme meant that the tents, which had started life as birthday tents before being changed to county fair tents, would see their third iteration, now finally as circus tents. The judges' tent was removed completely, as the Town Square Theatre became Mickey's permanent home at Magic Kingdom, and the Toontown Hall of Fame became Pete's Silly Sideshow, essentially the same thing, but now containing Mickey's friends all dressed as circus performers. Donald's boat was removed for the new Barnstormer queue, and a smaller Casey Jr. circus train splash pad was built further into the land. Minnie's house and Pete's garage were both demolished for the rerouted pathways, and Mickey's house was removed for a seating area. Today, Storybook Circus remains in this corner of Magic Kingdom, with some minor updates made to it over time, such as the recent addition of the small interactive Smellephants on Parade exhibit. Guests are still able to visit Mickey and Minnie's houses at the Toontowns in California and Tokyo, the former of which received a major update in 2023, adding the ride Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway, but the Florida exhibits are long since gone. I think the biggest problem Mickey's Toontown Fair faced in its lifespan was the fact that it was originally only supposed to be temporary. It was built for cheap and never given very much room, and so when Disney eventually decided to make it permanent, there was only so much that could be done without it requiring a complete rebuild. And when it was decided to tie it into the Toontown at Disneyland, a much more filled out and purpose-built area, it was always going to feel like a lesser version. Had it tried to become something separate from the Toontown theme, it could potentially have stood a better chance at surviving into the 2010s, but I think the inevitable comparison between the two lands probably doomed it in a sense. Particularly, the tents have always made this area feel like it was Disney just cheaping out. The fact that most of them are still there today means that even the renovated Storybook Circus still feels cheap, especially when compared to the rest of New Fantasyland. And with Pixie Hollow being cancelled, a lot of the space that was originally supposed to be used in the New Fantasyland update is still sitting empty. So even after all these decades, this corner of the park still bears the mark of a reduced, cheaply made land. With all that being said though, when you look back at the history of it, the closure wasn't actually the fault of Toontown Fair itself, but rather related to the need for neighbouring Fantasyland to be updated, with Toontown Fair just being collateral. And while it may have been a lesser version of something elsewhere, I do still think there was a lot of value in it. I loved the walkthrough of the houses, which I think was the best part of the land. I always love detailed walkthrough attractions, and there's something I wish Disney would do a lot more of. Spotting all the gags in Mickey Minnie's houses was always really fun, and elsewhere in the land, I personally preferred the queue theming on the farm version of the Barnstormer rather than the modern circus version. And of course, a lot of the value of Toontown's Fair for me comes from my own nostalgia for the area. This was a land I have a lot of memories visiting on trips to Disney World in the 2000s, and it was also the first part of the parks I really remember closing. I'd experienced things like the Ones of Life Pavilion when I was a lot younger, but I was too young to actually realise that it wasn't there on subsequent trips. But for Toontown Fair, by that point I was old enough to actually appreciate it by the time it closed. So that sort of defunct Disney nostalgia definitely plays into my feelings about the place. Storybook Circus is now 12 years old, almost as old as Toontown Fair was when it closed. And so while there haven't been any signs yet that this corner of Magic Kingdom will be getting another renovation, I do wonder if change is on the horizon. Perhaps this time Disney can finally do away with the tents and redesign the space from scratch. Although, with the next few years of Magic Kingdom being occupied by changes to the other side of the park, with Cars Land and Villains Land, in reality, I think Storybook Circus will likely stick around for a little longer. Let me know what you think about Mickey's Toontown Fair. Do you also remember the area fondly like I do? Do you have any memories of what came before it? And which iteration of the area do you prefer? Let me know in the comments. If you liked the video, please consider hitting subscribe so you don't miss out on more videos about theme parks coming in the future. And as always, I'll see you next time.